We live in a strange time in which suffering seems to have become a kind of social currency. There's a quote attributed to Freud that says, "Before you self-diagnose depression, make sure you're not surrounded by idiots." At first, it sounds harsh, almost rude, but it carries a disturbing truth. We often mistake frustration, sadness, or boredom for real illnesses, and we end up using serious diagnoses as labels for our everyday emotions. This isn't about minimizing the pain of others, much less delegitimizing those who truly suffer. Quite the opposite. But it's undeniable that in certain contexts, depression and ADHD have become almost a trend, a way to identify, connect, and even differentiate oneself on social media. It's as if, by publicly acknowledging symptoms or diagnoses, one gains recognition, belonging, and a kind of silent social approval. The problem isn't talking about mental health. The problem is transforming suffering into aesthetics, into something that needs to be displayed, shared, and acknowledged. There's a fine line between awareness and romanticization, and society seems to be stumbling over it. The internet, with its algorithms and endless feeds, fuels this trend. A post about anxiety, a video talking about mental fatigue, a poetic phrase about sadness, all of this generates engagement, likes, and comments. And these expressions of pain quickly transform into performative content, a spectacle of melancholy. It's important to note that this phenomenon doesn't just occur among teenagers. Young adults, digital influencers, and even more mature individuals end up absorbing this behavior, reproducing patterns that blend emotional sincerity with carefully constructed aesthetics. It's no coincidence that music has also become a powerful vehicle in this process. Artists from different generations have helped popularize a melancholic aesthetic in which slow songs, introspective lyrics, and somber atmospheres come to be seen as symbols of authenticity. Music, by its very nature, serves as a mirror of the human experience. It translates pain, anguish, frustration, and anxieties into sounds and words. However, when these expressions are consumed constantly and decontextualized, they end up forming references for the listener's own emotional lives. Young people and adolescents identify with the sadness, emptiness, or anxiety expressed in the songs and end up adopting these characteristics as part of their own identity. What was once an artistic expression becomes a guide for behavior, a reference for feelings, and even a lifestyle. This identification, when not mediated by care and accurate information, can lead to problematic consequences. Self-diagnosis has become common practice. Simply watching a quick video online, reading a few posts, or following accounts that describe generic symptoms, and many become convinced they have ADHD, depression, or clinical anxiety. The internet offers information, but it also confuses. Engaging with the suffering of others transforms individual experiences into universal patterns, and what was once a legitimate cry for help becomes a kind of emotional fad. This isn't to say that all people who self-diagnose are mistaken, but it's important to recognize that there is a performative, social, and aesthetic component to this behavior. The romanticization of illness is not just an individual phenomenon, it is cultural and social. Social media encourages the exposure of pain, and society celebrates suffering as something profound, poetic, and authentic. There is an implicit pressure to demonstrate mental and emotional exhaustion in a stylized way so that it is recognized and validated. Those who don't identify with popular symptoms may feel out of place, disconnected, or even superficial. Thus, illness ceases to be merely a health problem and becomes a symbol of belonging, a form of emotional social capital. But we must differentiate carefully. Not every young person who identifies with a sad post or a melancholic song is trivializing the illness. Not every expression of pain is performative. Many people truly suffer, and their pain is legitimate, needs attention, and deserves empathy. What we criticize is the growing tendency to transform suffering into an aesthetic, into something that is consumed and reproduced without reflection, care, or due seriousness. It's not about judging those who suffer, but about analyzing how culture and social media shape the perception of pain and illness. This aesthetic of suffering is also reflected in language. Poéticas frases, refletivas capturas e o conteúdo visual sobre tristeza e fadiga mental circulam incessantemente. Reforçam a ideia de ficar doente ou deprimido é natural. Igualmente individual, passar pela lente do sofrimento. A consequência desse é dois lados. De um lado, aumenta a visibilidade dos casos mentais e gera identificação. Por outro lado, educação para a mentida. Isso cria confusão sobre o que é uma experiência normal, o que é uma doença de verdade e o que é uma forma de performatividade. Self-diagnóstico, portanto, não surge do nada. É esfeliz pela cultura que valoriza o sofrimento, que celebra a melancolia como algo elegante, profundo ou sofisticado. Música, estética e conteúdo visual reforçam padrões de dor que se tornam desejáveis ou aspiracionais. Ou hiperativos eram símbolo de inteligência, sensibilidade ou autenticidade. This romanticization, ultimately, diverts attention from what really matters: care, treatment, and understanding. Furthermore, digital socialization causes every suffering to be compared and measured. Many young people observe others' posts and evaluate. Is my sadness deep enough? Is my anxiety real? This logic transforms legitimate human experiences into silent competitions of suffering, something that needs to be perceived as meaningful to have social value. Pain becomes validated not by its intensity or actual impact, but by its visibility, aesthetics, and recognition on social media. It is therefore necessary to reflect on our own behaviors. How often do we find ourselves admiring a sad phrase, enjoying a somber song, or identifying with symptoms that may not truly represent us? The key point is, it is possible to talk about pain without transforming it into a lifestyle. It is possible to acknowledge suffering without turning it into a performative identity. Raising awareness, reflecting on and sharing experiences is different from glamorizing, reproducing, and transforming illness into aesthetics. The line is thin, but discernible when observed carefully and honestly. We must not forget that the romanticization of illness has real effects. It influences how young people perceive their own mental health, how they relate to others, and even how they seek professional help. The risk of normalizing symptoms, minimizing treatments, or delaying diagnoses is real, but at the same time, it's crucial not to generalize. There are thousands of individual stories of real suffering, of overcoming, of silent struggle, which don't fit into trends or fads. Each experience is unique, and any cultural analysis must respect this. In the end, reflection is essential. Pain exists, and it needs to be heard. But transforming pain into aesthetics, a trend, or a label is dangerous. It's not about denying suffering, but about recognizing the context in which it circulates, the role of culture, social media, and music in constructing identities based on pain. Suffering isn't pretty, and mental health isn't an accessory. Healing, care, and understanding are far more important than likes or social recognition. And in the end, perhaps the most important lesson is simple. Feeling sad, anxious, or tired is human. Seeking help, reflecting on oneself, and understanding one's own mind are necessary. But we must be wary of the trend of illness, the tendency to transform illness into an identity, and the glorification of suffering. Because as Freud provocatively reminds us, sometimes we're not sick, we're just surrounded by influences that confuse sadness with illness. And recognizing this is the first step to talking about pain responsibly, empathetically, and truthfully.